Okay. I'll let folks come in. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to JWA's poetry event. I'm Judith Rosenbaum of the Jewish Women's Archive. I'm really happy to be back with you tonight for this special poetry session. Please say hello in the chat. Make sure to chat to everyone. We love to know who is with us in the room and where you are zooming in from. The chat box is also where you should add your questions, and I will try to bring some of them in later on in the program. A few words about JWA for anyone who's new to us. We are a digital archive that expands and transforms the way we understand history and Jewish culture by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories. We love to explore all of the creative ways that Jewish women make meaning of the past, present, and future, including poetry. And we do this work because we believe that uncovering a more diverse and nuanced story with many, many voices helps us create a better world. So thank you so much for being our partners in this work. These virtual programs are just one small piece of what JWA does. I hope you'll check out jwa.org to experience and explore the full range of projects and resources that we offer. A quick logistical note, if you would like captioning, there should be a button at the bottom of your screen that says CC or show captions, and you can turn on the captions for you that way. Okay, so tonight we have a really special program, a conversation with three poets, which feels like an embarrassment of riches. National Poetry Month just ended, but we at JWA believe that poetry is really important all year long. And I have to say that for me, particularly in difficult times, poetry is often what I turn to. So I hope that this will be a wonderful evening of just hearing voices that will bring us questions and peace and healing and lots of visions of alternate futures. We'll get to hear some poetry. We'll also have the opportunity to talk to our three poets about their work and their process. And as always, we welcome your questions. So let me introduce our poets tonight. Maya Bernstein is a poet, musician, and founding co-director of the Institute for Transformational Leadership's Certificate in Facilitation at Georgetown University. She serves as the Director of Leadership Education at Yeshivat Maharat, and she's on the global faculty of the Masa Leadership Center. She has released 2 albums of original music with Noah Solomon, and her first collection of poetry just came out recently, There Is No Place Without You. Merle Feld is a widely published poet, award-winning playwright, peace activist, and educator who has pioneered teaching writing as a spiritual practice. Her first book, A Spiritual Life, recently celebrated its 25th anniversary, and her most recent book is Longing Poems of a Life. Merle has facilitated dialogue on the West Bank and at Seeds of Peace and worked with grassroots community organizers in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. She serves as a mentor to rabbinical students and rabbis through her work teaching writing as a spiritual practice. And last but certainly not least, Aurora Levins Morales is a Puerto Rican Ashkenazi feminist poet, essayist, and social justice activist. She's also an artist, teacher, healer, farmer, and revolutionary. She's the author of 9 books, including the forthcoming Rimonim, Ritual Poetry of Jewish Liberation, which I know all of us at JWA are eagerly awaiting. And she comes to us tonight from Puerto Rico. Welcome to all of you. It is such an honor to have you here with us. So to get us into the poetry spirit and to begin to get to know all of you, we're going to begin with some reading. So I'm going to ask Merle to kick us off.
Okay. The poem I'm going to share first was commissioned by okay, it escapes me who commissioned it. That's very embarrassing.
Right with you.
Oh, WRN. Thank you, the Women's Rabbinic Network. My mind went blank. To celebrate the 50th anniversary of Sally Priesand's ordination, the first American woman to be ordained as a rabbi. So here's the poem that came to me in honor of Sally. Let my people go that we may serve you. Remember girdles, Remember the anger we weren't supposed to show or even feel. Remember sitting and waiting to say Baruch Hu as someone counted, not one, not two. The being invisible, the tears blinked back fiercely. Remember the love, the innocence assaulted, hearing for the first time those words and those words and those, such words in a holy book, demeaning me, you, us. All these years later, I feel the pain rising, constricting, afflicting, remembering, searching for a reason to stay. Love is stronger than death. Tears became anger, that word, the ultimate weapon. She's an angry woman. So we can ignore her, put her down, close our ears and hearts. Blessed be the allies calling for the first time from the Bima, Ta'amod, the ones who broke through the tight circles on Simchas Torah and passed us a scroll to hold, to dance with. The ones who said yes, 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 and yes. And we, the wrestlers, I won't let you go till you bless me. The lust, the longing to learn, to lane, to lead, to bench, to be counted, to be called, to locate our wisdom, to inhabit our power and our tenderness, to build holy communities fully and richly as ourselves, as Jewish women, as rabbis. I won't let you go till you bless me. Now and going forward, now and for tomorrow, my heart soars, it flies, it bursts. From Sally to Sandy to Sarah, from Amy and Amy to Annie to Ariel, Deborah, Devorah, wave after wave after wave. I see joyous throngs. There's Rachel and Hara, Jen, Jamie, Jessica, Jan, and Kara. There's Sharon and Sharon and Sharon. Too many to name. We're just getting started. For so long, the world was unimaginable with you in it. Now, we cannot imagine a world without you. We bless the work of your hands. We bless the work of your hearts. We are blessed to be here, still, just at the beginning.
Thank you so much, Merle. That was beautiful.
Mhm.
Aurora, will you share with us next?
Yeah, that was a wonderful opening. I want to say that my great-grandmother's grandmother was a wife of a rabbi in Ukraine and stormed out of temple because she couldn't be a rabbi, even though she was a better scholar. And he went with her. And 7 generations later, my daughter got to stand on the bima and do an anti-war parsha during that, right after 9/11. So that lineage of silenced and then bursting into voice is one of our core family stories. I'm going to read you my Tisha B'Av poem. I was also, in a sense, commissioned. I started having a lot of rabbis and organizers email me 5 days before an event and say, do you have something or can you write it for this holiday, this event? I said, no, this isn't put in a nickel, get out a gumball. And so I suggested that they create a network to which I could be a poet in residence collectively. And that was what began my project of the Rimoni collection. So for Tisha B'Av, begin with a quote from Leonard Cohen's anthem, There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. I will not weep for shattered eggshells from which bird song fills the world. I will not weep for seed pods split apart to fling their airy parachutes into the wind. I will not weep for chrysalides, crucibles of unmaking from which we come like flowers from buds made new. My wings have opened. I will not crouch here crying over dead skin. I will follow the scent of honey to the beckoning blossoms that dust my flight with gold. Why would I cry over temples destroyed when we are all the temple we need? I will grind eggshell into effun, ancestral powder of protection. I will tend the milkweed that the wind brings to my garden and feed the pollinators of the world to come. I will keep dissolving what no longer serves, be a cauldron of the imaginal, let the broken reinvent itself into dazzling form. Come, let us leave this ancient dust, these stones that once contained eternal light. Can you not feel it shining in our bones?
Thank you, Aurora. I like that reframe and possibility for hope. Maya.
Wow, it's such an honor to be reading with Aurora and Merle. I'm thinking about the pollinators of the world to come and the list of these names of women. And I have the privilege of teaching at Yeshivat Maharat, which is ordaining women in the Orthodox community. So it's very special to be together. I wanted to read a poem that was partly inspired by Ross Gay, who's a poet who wrote a poem called There's a Puritan in Me. My poem is called There's an Abraham in Me. And it was also inspired by a dear friend named Rachel Annisfeld, who does a Parsha meditation on Zoom every week from Atlanta. And she uses internal family systems therapy as a lens through which to look at portions of the Torah, really thinking about what they represent in terms of what's inside of us. So there's an Abraham in me. There's an Abraham in me whose split wood is so flammable it ignites with a glance, whose saddled donkey is so obedient he would sit without thought of thirst for days. He wields an axe, the Abraham in me, and cuts things apart. He is famous, this Abraham is, for his rigorous economy, for his mellifluous tongue. Some stop reading here. Fondly he speaks of the Isaac in me, the one he loves enough to kill to protect his reputation, the one always willing to take a hand, to go together, wide-eyed, yet unsuspecting of the cleaver, the kindling. Oh, inner Isaac, why don't you notice my gleaming butcher knife? Isaac in me, why are you willing to make of my body an apple-dappled tree? Are you willing to lie on the altar to better see the cloud-laced sky? Or maybe you're unwilling and hoping for word from the Sarah in me. Others stop reading here. Though she stays at home, lifting one leg, then another out of bed, taking one breath, then another at a time, slicing into her years as if into a pie, which she warms and sets on a hand-painted pottery plate dotted with sheep and dew-soaked hills. She sits, this Sarah in me, with her steaming tea, gazing out the window at the Hagar in me, whom I banished long ago, piercing the dough with her fork tines. What is she waiting for? Still others stop reading here. And the angel? Is there an angel in me? And where would she direct me? And would I listen?
both a kind of reckoning with the past and an insistence that there is a future that we are helping to bring, and that we do that without letting go of the past. We can't actually. It's, as Maya, as you're saying, like, it's part of us, it's within us, and there's a lot of pain there, and trauma that we can't quite leave behind, but also that it is what informs us in the road that we take forward, and in fact is part of the gift that we carry forward. So I really appreciate that thread. And one of the things that it reminds me is that all of you write poetry that engages with liturgy and ritual, and that reworks those pieces of tradition. So maybe we'll start there. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you do that in your work, or how you think about your work as engaging with or participating in liturgical and ritual practice.
Mm.
Or you can expand it to Jewish text more broadly, if it, not just the liturgical, but working with that language of tradition.
I could start because it goes back to that story I was telling about my great-grandmother's grandmother and that silencing that took place 6 generations ago. And I grew up in a non-observant radical Jewish family, atheists, and came to Jewish ritual and the recreation of liturgy in feminist seders in the Bay Area in the 80s. And through that process, watching primarily white lesbian writers remaking the Seder, was also asking, where do I enter as a Puerto Rican Jew? That whole process of pulling liturgy to me and transforming it for my needs began in that historical moment. And within a feminist movement, where that really was where I became a public writer.
Mm-hmm.
So the remaking of the traditional was very much the ecosystem. The retelling of women's stories across ethnicities was a central part of how I became a writer. My mother's was also a feminist poet.
Wow. So I also grew up in a, I don't know, assimilated, just sort of marginally Jewish home in a way. Although I grew up in Brooklyn, where I mean, even non-Jews are sort of Jews. But like that was the extent of my Jewish tradition, and found a very rich Jewish life in college for the first time, and discovered Jewish texts for the first time, and in my adult life, I can't even distinguish between the person in me who is in conversation with Jewish texts, and that Jewish texts are so a part of me. I don't know how to slice and dice it to say it's so integrated. I mean, I think I write to try to understand what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and that inquisitive mind is always in the mix in writing poetry. Who are these people? Who are these biblical people? Who are, and so forth and so on.
I grew up in the New York area and also in Jerusalem in a modern Orthodox Jewish household, and went to Jewish day schools and to synagogue every week. And I would say that I drank in Jewish text with mother's milk. And so whether I like it or not, sort of no matter what I do, it's so primal and early in me that my first frame of literary reference is always biblical text, and often in Hebrew. I was at a dinner just earlier this evening, and somebody said, "Oh, those two things are actually one thing." And I said, "Chalom echadhu," like Joseph said to Pharaoh, "It is one dream. The two dreams are one dream." I can't help it. That's where my brain goes. So I used to try and resist it, and I think at some point I decided to write into it, to say, okay, so this text is going to accompany me, and these words are going to show up in my work. And then, as Merle and Aurora are saying, what does it mean to be a woman in this tradition, and what does it mean to want to challenge this tradition? I don't want to be trapped in it. So there's an inevitable wrestling all the time.
And also, what part of the way that we think about it at JWA also is the ways in which once you add other voices into the conversation, and this is very much a feminist perspective, it doesn't just grow the conversation, it actually changes the conversation. And then that changes what's possible in terms of other people interacting with the tradition and even understanding the tradition, and your voices become part of that too, right? So it becomes a layer of, another layer that is part of the conversation, a layer of midrash, a layer of, it just expands Jewish text in a way that only sort of creates the possibility for more Torah and wisdom in the world. And so we think about that at JWA in terms of some of the, just the ways even that women's voices historically do that. But I think in the language of poetry and liturgy and tradition in other ways, that is certainly true as well.
I wanted to add that to clarify that my family's Jewish identity was very strong. It was not associated with biblical text, but in a way, Marx was my Jewish text that we, did commentary on.
Wow.
And that, I grew up knowing about radical Jewish foremothers who were labor organizers, who were feminists. And so I don't think of my family so much as being assimilated as having chosen a particular path within Eastern European Jewish identity.
Well, and that leads me to another question that I had for all of you, because all three of you write poetry, but you also write in other forms, and you also do other kinds of work in the world, teaching, activism, coaching, other kinds of things. So I'd love to hear a little bit about sort of both why poetry as part of that mix, and also the relationship between the various kinds of work that you do. And I think of that as being, connected, Aurora, to what you're saying about these kinds of different streams of Jewish practice that are very much about also how you show up in the world and what the ways in which you engage in the larger world.
Who wants to jump in?
Hi. So before there's so much awareness of my sighing throughout my life. and these days, oh wow, is the sigh back. The sigh is back. So I started out as a playwright, really, and not writing poetry was like a little bit here and there on the side. After spending a year living in Jerusalem in 1989, 1990, when I was facilitating Israeli-Palestinian dialogue on the West Bank, I was I was creating a play about simultaneously an Israeli and a Palestinian woman, and Sarah and Hagar. And those themes kind of interwove through the play. And I got, in like the early 90s, the most amazing rejection letters. Like, theater producers of note would write personal notes and say, this is a great play, but it's not quite right for our audience. Like it was, right. And at a certain point, I just thought, why am I spending my time doing this? Like, I'm not going to write a better play than this. This is it. So I moved on to poetry, and used that as an opportunity to explore some of the same themes. Anyway.
Aurora, shall I go?
I'm trying to hold back because I come from two very talkative ancestral lines. I jump in too fast with my hands flying. So
Of course,
I'm trying to hold back to defer to you both.
go for it.
I call on you, Maya.
All right. So one of the ways I think about my work is I work trying to help systems go through change processes. One way of talking about that is talking about leadership. How do you try and mobilize people to change from a current state to a desired future state? And often when I teach, I draw two circles, one representing the current state, the other representing the desired future state, with an arrow going from the current state to the desired future state, and then with 100 arrows pushing back against that motion. And it's that middle space of transformation that I've always found fascinating. The intersection of tradition and innovation. What do you hold on to? What do you let go of? How do we change internally as individuals, and how do we change and grow as systems, as peoples? And then I teach facilitation, which is essentially the process of being in the mess of those arrows, trying to help people have some skills to learn how to talk to each other, listen to each other, grapple with the unknown, and challenge each other to move. And that's been my professional career, for I'd say 2 decades now. I've always loved to write. I started writing poetry probably when I was about 13 years old on a log in summer camp, feeling very lonely, and then realizing that the sun and the trees filled me, and I felt amongst these great beings, and by writing about it, I could find it quiet my inner turmoil and begin to find myself and connect to, I don't know what we want to call it, the Shekhinah, the divine, the spirit. And I've returned to poetry, and I'm finishing an MFA. I'm graduating next week. I'm trying to, thank you, to give myself permission to take that writing more seriously. And on the one hand, I want to say, I think those two pieces are connected. The being in the unknown, poetry feels like, of all forms of writing, the best form for being in the unknown. But I also think that they're two very different things. I think for me, poetry is very personal and spiritual and private, and it helps balance my outward facing life. I hope my words will touch other people's quiet spirit places, but it's a work of trying to find myself, trying to make sense of being in the world, trying to connect to the divine, and to have the courage to keep going.
It's a different kind of leadership.
Yeah.
This is all so interesting. My mother taught me how to read, and the first time I understood the shapes on the page as a word, I thought, this is magic. This is what I want to do forever.
Mm.
I was in a home where my parents read poetry aloud all the time in English and Spanish from lots of different sources, a lot of it socially engaged. So my relationship to poetry is in a way opposite, that it always felt like a world-facing activity I was doing with people. And I don't feel like my writing is separable from my activism. That what I do, I write a lot about memory and imagination, about history and hope, and understanding hope as a decision rather than a feeling.
Wow.
I work to expand imagination to the possibility of having things become better, having us win a world of humanity and reciprocity.
Mm.
And I draw a lot from ecology, because I grew up in a rainforest and it was my best friend. Poetry, I write a lot of prose poetry. I love the tidal zone between poetry and prose. And I write a lot, even when I'm like, when I respond to things out in the world, I have to do it from my innermost self. Otherwise, I'm pamphleteering. I'm responding to other people's need for things to be said, but not necessarily the need I feel inside myself about what to say. This is one of those places where I want to answer a question with a poem. I don't know if we have time for that.
Go for it. Go for it.
I will do that. I was actually thinking about the summons poem that we were talking about earlier, because in the wake of October 7th, I felt this enormous tugging on me as a public facing progressive Jewish voice. Say something, say something, say something, say something. And there were a lot of particular things people wanted me to say. And I had to sit really quietly in a remote rural place that was not my house to be able to hear what is it in me that I feel I can say in this moment that will actually be of use in the world, and that isn't falsified by my trying to meet other people's requirements. And this poem has gone viral and been set to music, and often the poem I write most for my own need is the one that goes viral, and it turns out that other people also need.
Yeah, authenticity is very powerful.
Yeah, and the personal connection to the historical moment is what most people, not pontificating about it. So, but sometimes the noise you have to get out of the collective noise to be able to find that. Summons. Last night I dreamed 10,000 grandmothers from the 1,200 corners of the earth walked out into the gap, one breath deep, between the bullet and the flesh, between the bomb and the family. They told me we cannot wait for governments. There are no peacekeepers boarding planes. There are no leaders who dare to say every life is precious, so it will have to be us. They said we will cup our hands around each heart. We will sing the earth's song, the song of water, a song so beautiful that vengeance will turn to weeping. The mourners will embrace, and grief replace every impulse toward harm. 10,000 is not enough, they said. So we have sent this dream like a flock of doves into the sleep of the world. Wake up, put on your shoes. You who are reading this, I am bringing bandages and a bag of scented guavas from my trees. I think I remember the tune. Meet me at the corner. Let's go.
I very much relate to that sense of there's a lot of noise and it's hard to hear the inner voice of what needs to be said in this moment, and to make sure you're saying what you need to say as opposed to what you think people need to hear, or find the meeting point between what you need to say and what people need to hear. So I very much appreciate that, and appreciate that kind of impulse to bring the dream to life and to invite people into it and to make that real.
Really amazing. Amazing.
Exquisite poem, Aurora. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And also, you know, what you say about just clearing all the noise and the chatter, is how I've described for people who ask, how do you write a poem? Just getting so quiet, you know, and just,
Empty bowl.
you know, going as deep as you can, and then even deeper into that quiet to be able to hear. Yeah.
A lot of times for me, it's listening to my body. Like, what does my belly want to say about this? What does my breath want to say about this? Like, forget what my brain is telling me needs to be said.
Right.
What is this body of this poet?
Well, and that's actually another question that I had for all of you, because all of you write about the body as a site of pleasure, of pain, of illness, of healing, of birth, of, you know, misuse. And I am curious how you think about using the language of poetry to engage with the really physical embodied experiences. Because I think often people think of, you know, poetry as somehow being ethereal and separate from the physical. But as you're saying, Aurora, there's something, you know, you can't write from any place but where you are. And this is something I'm interested in also in my own scholarship, is very much about sort of how women reckon with embodiment, and also with fighting against the ways in which embodiment has been placed as a limitation on women, and sort of how do we talk about that and experience that and organize around that. So so I admit it's a pet interest of mine, but also something that I love in all of your work, and how rooted in that, you know, how much you're able to speak from the body and to the body.
Did you notice how all of us laughed when you talked about being seen as this disembodied thing?
Right.
Male, white, canonical, Eurocentric poetry. Maybe.
Right, exactly.
And even there.
Well, I was going to say, Aurora, something I thought about, a quote, it's attributed to Viktor Frankl, but then it's unclear if it's from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our freedom to choose. And so, and Merle, what you were talking about getting quiet, partly what I'm trying to relearn is to slow down, to slow myself down, to try and create more slowness in the life around me, or to pluck myself out. And Judith, for me, that goes to poems come to me when I'm swimming in the water, and when I'm walking in the forest, and when I'm doing yoga and moving. I find my soul in my body, and when I'm disembodied, I lose it. And Aurora inspired me. I have a poem to answer about the body, but I don't know if Aurora or Merle want to speak to the body first.
No, please.
No, bring it on. Okay.
Go for it. Yeah.
This is called, okay, it's called Sitting Shiva for my estrogen. I really should make the time to sit Shiva for my estrogen. But who would come to tell beautiful stories about her? Certainly not my forsaken lover, and the children are glad not to remember her at all. How slippery and round she was, full of desire always. How she would show up like an embarrassing relative, overflowing, unannounced, wearing a ridiculous hat, teeming with fuchsia hydrangeas, her heaving breath preceding her perfume as she poured into the house. I should sit and remember her better, but it's hard now to lower myself to the floor, to bend, to twist, to gaze, to long, to stop, hoping somehow she may yet come just once more down the driveway.
Whoa.
I love it.
Great.
Oh, so, God, my quandary thinking about, my poems about my body and the body, and it is just, I have poems in this new book that, are so hard to hear. And they're hard. They're not hard for me to read. They're hard for people to hear. And there's such a sense of, those aren't the poems I should read. I should read the, the happy poems, Judith, I look to you for guidance.
I think we can handle more than we ever think we can. And I think that even the poems that are hard to hear they speak to people. I don't think you should hold back to protect anybody. I think you should read what you feel moved to read.
I agree. Trust people to hold what you're offering or to set it aside if they need to.
You could give people a content warning if you want, and people could mute if they feel like they
For
need to.
sure, for sure.
The chat is voting that you speak.
Yes, exactly.
The chat is clamoring for your words.
So I grew up in a violent home, in a very small apartment that was a violent home. I was not the physical victim of that. My oldest brother was. But I was a young child in a very small apartment, hearing everything, taking everything into my body. Safe has disappeared. Each time after the beating, I try to reestablish normal. We are all in a daze, not able to believe what has happened in our home, struggling to rebuild safe. But safe has disappeared. It cannot be reestablished. Still, I try, I reason. What caused the fury, the anger? What happened right before? How can we avoid the before next time? I become a lookout, a watchman, a diviner of moods, the glint in an eye, the beginning of a grimace on the lips, a large body that suddenly becomes rigidly disapproving. I see I am without girlish charms. I see I am unable to distract him. I cannot execute a sweet feminine twirl that then brings a smile, that releases, tames the crouching beast. I am vigilant, but without power.
Thank you for sharing that.
Someone asked me recently, why do you have to go back there? Why do you always have to go back there? And I realized what the difference was between us. I said, I'm not going back there. I'm still there.
Mm.
So,
Well, it's also it's related to what we were talking about earlier around the languages that we draw on that are the languages that are part of us, right? Like there's the Jewish languages that we draw on because they're part of what our inheritance was. And then there are other experiences that are part of our inheritance that are also part of the language that we use and the stories that we tell. And there's not so much picking and choosing. There's a lot of it chooses, it's just part of you and it's there. And that's what we have at our disposal to speak. But I think that part of what's so important about the work that all of you do is that by putting those experiences into language, you're giving other people the language to speak of their experience too, or to see recognition or to learn from experience. And that process of naming and taking away the silences that have too often been part of women's lives and the lives of so many people, especially people on the margins. I think that's part of the healing and reparation work that we do. So thank you for contributing to that, Merle.
Thank you.
I very much feel my body as part of an ecosystem. Dad was an ecologist. My mom was an amateur naturalist, and I grew up in a rainforest in a colonized land, so that what was being done to the land and being done to my body seemed inseparable, and still do. What's being done to the earth is being done to us, and vice versa, which is why the disability justice movement and the literary explosion that came out of it was such a joy for me. And I've been very much an early voice in that. When I teach writing, I often start out by giving people exercises around body parts. What do the backs of my knees know? What part of my body do I lead with when I move through the world? What do my teeth have to say? Teeth almost always have something to say about class. Bellies and hair are way more loaded than wrists and knuckles. But the thing I say to people is that the body can be injured, but it doesn't lie. Wow. Deception doesn't come from the flesh. And so for me, my body is often an editor. I'm writing something and something feels funky in the middle of my torso, and I'm going, okay, that wasn't right. How do I get back there to the place where it does feel aligned? That's how I catch the seeping in of falsehoods, of trying to write someone else's story or someone else's poem. And I was a trafficked child without my parents' knowledge. That it's inseparable from colonialism in Puerto Rico. It's inseparable from my being a girl child. It's inseparable from sexism and all the other isms. And I just can't not. I mean, I don't understand the question a lot of times when people say, how do you write in an embodied way? Because I don't understand how not to. And what I thought of is not actually a direct response to, I don't know, the thing that popped into my head was the first poem I read in public. When I was 23, I was in a writing workshop where I was given an assignment so abstract that I couldn't understand what it actually was. And I wrote in response, poetry is something refined in your vocabulary, taking its place at the table in a silver bowl, essence of culture. I come from the earth where the cane was grown. I know the knobbed rooting, green spears, heights of caña against the sky, purple plumed. I know the backache of the machetero, the arc of steel cutting, the rhythm of harvest leaving acres of sharp spikes that wound the feet, and the sweet smoke of the llamarada, rings of red fire burning dark sugar into the wind. My poems grow from the ground. I know what they are made of, heavy, raw, green. Sugar, you say, is sweet. 1 teaspoon in a cup of coffee, life's not so bad. Caña, I reply, yields many things. Molasses for the horses, rum for the tiredness of the machetero, industrial alcohol to cleanse, distill, to burn as fuel. I don't write my poems for anybody's sweet tooth. My poems are acetylene torches welding steel. My poems are flamethrowers cutting paths through the world. My poems are bamboo spears opening the air. They come from the earth, common and brown. You know, it was a declaration of allegiance to being a social justice poet, but it was also a declaration of embodiment. It's like, you can't take the sugar out of the cane. You can't separate white sucrose from the soil.
Yeah.
So that turns out to be my answer to that.
Such rootedness.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And the severing of that rootedness is the core of injustice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't think of any injustice that doesn't start with severing our connections to our own bodies and our connections to the world around us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how can we be the kind of poets we are and not speak from the bodies we have?
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time winding down here. I would love to be able to end with some more poems. So who wants to read again now? Maya, do you want to go now?
Sure. I'll read a poem called "I'm Preparing My Body for Your Birth," since we've been embodied. I'm preparing my body for your birth, the way the Chevra Kadisha prepares the dead for burial. I cut my nails, thumb, pinky, middle finger, pointer, ring finger. I squeeze my wedding band off that swollen stump. I anoint my massive belly with lilac oil and watch the ghost of your fist move across me, a purple current in that vast ocean I contain. Do the dead flutter so too? I squat to stretch my pelvis as narrow as the ancient gates of the old city of Jerusalem, cool and wet, pilgrims and peddlers coming, going, squeezing past each other, and the unseen spirits whose bodies scrubbed and wrapped in white, as mine is now, the towel barely stretching round, are lowered down as they rise up. I'm preparing my body to bear down so you may rise, your cry as wild and haunting as a shofar's, so that the walls that separate you from me, the living from the dead, the holy from the profane, come crashing down.
Mm.
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 Thank you.
You or me?
You.
Is a part of the night and day cycle in Rimonim. Awake. There is a pink light at dawn in spring that signals the trees to bloom, because this is the moment for blossoming, so there will be seeds nestled in the fruits of summer. There are cells in the bodies of caterpillars that wake when the worm has outgrown the cocoon, singing Dazal, unmake yourself. It's time to become something winged beyond your imagining. There is a medicine in the bodies of willows that calls forth roots from the broken twigs and says to the cuttings, each wound is full of possibility. Let your torn edges tingle and start again. I am awake now to the promise of this day, to push out buds, to be wide-petaled, to welcome pollen, set fruit. I am awake now to the unmaking that comes before transformation, awake to becoming new and improbable. I am awake now in all my torn and splintered glory, ready to root into the soil and heal. Bless me, for this is the time and I am awake.
Hmm.
Amazing privilege. Amazing privilege. I don't know where the time went.
I know.
I, can I do a last one?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
finish
please,
us off.
absolutely.
Okay, all right. Um, hmm. Mm. Oh, which one? Stay with me a little longer, please. Sitting again with the yahrzeit candle. When I was 10, afraid you'd leave me, you'd die, I asked, and you responded, I won't die till you don't need me anymore. And I believed you. I believed everything you said, even when I knew it wasn't true. Of course your father loves you. It's just he has his own way of showing it. So I imagined there would come a time when I was almost old and you were very old, and that's when you would leave me, when I didn't need you anymore. Imagining that when you're almost old, you wouldn't need a mother anymore. But none of it was true. You loathed me. You died when I was still quite young and still needed you. And you need a mother always. Through the full years and the parched years, I've learned to find glimpses, moments of your love. As I embody tenderness with my daughter, son, my dearest friends, my students, I give a mother's love to many. Repeatedly, I recreate the rhythm, the release of mother and child nursing. And still I love you, even though regarding matters of the gravest importance, you lied. Still, I miss the soft waves of your hair, your generous smile. I miss touching you and your touch on me. I miss the smell of you, the light that shone from you. I miss your ready laugh, your sweetness, the sound of you singing. Our world was a treacherous place, and you couldn't even protect me in our tiny apartment. Nonetheless, you loved me, and that was enough. It gave me the strength to keep getting up, to go out, to go on. It's one of your mysteries I am still unraveling. Thank you for bringing me here.
Thank you all so much. It was such a privilege to be in this room and this conversation with all of you. And your words were just incredibly beautiful and hopeful and heart-filling, which is not easy to come by these days. So thank you for reminding us, in the words of the great Audre Lorde, that poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. Amen, amen. I'm also thinking a little bit about Adrienne Rich's words from Diving into the Wreck, that the words are purposes, the words are maps. And so I thank you for helping us navigate tonight a little bit through this world. So I hope everyone who's been in the room with us, thank you for being here. I hope you feel as nourished as I do. And I hope that everyone will continue to delve more deeply into all of your work. Really, thank you so much again, Merle and Maya and Aurora, for being with us and for sharing of yourselves and for the work you do in the world. I want to point people towards some other relevant resources at JWA. There's always more to discover. We have Merle's poem, We All Stood Together, is in our feminism exhibit. There's also an oral history I did with Merle 24 years ago in our oral history collection. Aurora is featured in our encyclopedia. You can read that entry. We recently did an interview with Jessica Jacobs, who's the founder and executive director of a new organization, Yetzirah, a home for Jewish poetry, and Maya is on the board of that organization and is mentioned in that interview. And of course, in our encyclopedia, we have a more general entry about Jewish women poets in the US, so you can learn about others as well. Our next book talk series is coming in June, so keep an eye out for an announcement about that, which should be coming any day. And again, just thank you all for being with us. I hope to see you all soon. And until next time, take good care and sending many blessings to all of you. Good night, everybody.